Lynn. But let's just kick this off. Welcome everybody to Waltham Inclusive Neighborhoods ADU info session. So this is really about some of the laws that the state has passed and how that is going to affect Waltham, eventually up to sort of the opportunity for public engagement in just over a week from now. So this is recording. Very good. Yeah. So just to hop in here. Why are we here? What's going on right now? So thanks to the Affordable Homes Act, ADUs are legal by right statewide. So this is something that was passed at the state level. This means that, for the most part, ADUs are allowed to be built by right. You don't have to go through any special permit, discretionary approval in your lot. Municipalities cannot impose what are called unreasonable restrictions on ADUs. At the moment, Waltham has quite a lot. But as part of this law, they included that language. But as a result of this, Waltham must update its zoning language to comply with this new law. So Waltham has to, listen to what the state is saying and, submit some amendments to its zoning. So let's take a step back. So what are ADUs actually? So ADUs are accessory dwelling units. And those are a small residential living space that can be in the same lot or the same building as another home. This comes from mass.gov's website here. So it's just some examples about how they can be attached or detached. They can be in the attic, they can be in the basement. They talk about converting a garage from ADUs. So there's more than just these 6 that are possible, but just some examples of what it might look like. The benefits of ADUs, there are several. We look at low-cost housing opportunities, allowing adult children or older relatives to remain in their neighborhood. We talk about allowing more options for older adults if you need caregivers, being able to have more of those folks local. Adding these small rental units. So ADUs aren't allowed to be larger than 900 square feet. So being able to have, small, modest opportunities to rent in our neighborhoods. We increase much needed affordable and also diverse housing options. Lots of times when housing goes up, we'll see a big apartment building goes up and it's a lot of 1- and 2-bedroom units, and it's 300 units, that's great, but it's a lot of the same. So this adds a different level of diversity into the types of units you can get in the scale and location. From an environmental perspective, ADUs are smaller, they're using less water, they're using less electricity. So they can be more green than other types of apartments. And also they can really increase property values. So just like any zoning restrictions, when you remove them and you allow people to do more with their own property, that increases the value of their property since they're given more options of what they can do with it. So what is the overview of the new law that the state passed? So the big point is up here in bold, that a single ADU is allowed by right in neighborhoods where single family homes are allowed with reasonable restrictions. So if there's a neighborhood that allows single family homes, you can build an ADU there. When we kind of drill into this, what does that mean? Is that, ADUs may follow the zoning requirements of the neighborhood they live in, but they can't have additional requirements. That, if you look at parking, that ADUs, you may allow 1 additional parking space to build an ADU if it is more than half a mile from transit. That ADUs or the primary residence may not have an owner occupancy, familial relationship, or other demographic requirement. A lot of times, these are kind of like in-law apartments, or maybe you have an adult child, but that you can't have those type of restrictions when you build or rent out an ADU anymore. One thing that happens is that municipalities can't require an ADU to have a full set of separate utility hookups. You have to hook it into the main breaker. You don't have to have a whole new set for water, sewage, all of that. And one thing that this law does allow is that municipalities may restrict short-term rentals for ADUs. So this is like Airbnbs, exactly. So a lot of what the law tries to do is get rid of those requirements that are unreasonable But they are allowed to have some restrictions like the short-term rental restriction. So what is current law? What is the current laws that Waltham has now? It's not great. It's a lot of these very restrictive laws. That is why the state took action in the way they did. I'm not going to go through all of it, but basically it's more or less impossible to build an ADU with the laws that Waltham has. Just a few highlights is that the building had to exist at the date the ADU law was written. So you had to be grandfathered in. The owner had to own the lot for at least 5 years before building the ADU. That's not language that you see for any other zoning law. It's very strange. They say that if you build an ADU, construction cannot alter the exterior of the dwelling or increase floor area, which is very silly when you try to wrap your head around it. It also says that 2 additional parking spaces are required. So once again, if this is something that you're building for in-laws, just having to say that, these elderly folks are, driving just as much as any other of us. So there were just lots of those laws that were burdensome, and what the Affordable Homes Act would say would be very constrictive and unreasonable is the language they use. So the Affordable Homes Act basically is makes this Waltham law non-enforceable, and it's why we need new ones. So what is Waltham proposing? They're proposing something. It moves towards compliance, but it includes several explicitly unreasonable regulations. So if you read the law that the state has, the things that it says you can't do is still what Waltham is trying to do. So if you look at Waltham's proposed law on the left, it says that an ADU is a secondary self-contained dwelling unit, either attached or detached from a principal single-family detached dwelling. That it can be located on the same lot as a principal single-family detached dwelling. So not any dwelling, but just single families. Whereas in the definition of protected use ADU that comes from the state law is that it's attached or detached that is located or proposed to be located on a lot in a single-family residential zoning district. So that if you have a 2-family home, state law says you should be able to still build an ADU there. That's something that Waltham is explicitly saying is not allowed. In Waltham's law, they say that the total floor area of the ADU cannot be less than 600 square feet or exceed 900 square feet or 50% of the total gross floor area. And what this means is that the state law has the latter half. It can either be 900 square feet or half the total gross floor area, whichever is smaller. But by having this clause in Waltham's law saying that it can't be less than 600 square feet, you're restricting the ability for very small homes, if you have a 1,200, 1,100 square foot home, to include an ADU. And what we see is that, in the state law, that any restriction or regulation imposed by a municipality shall be unreasonable if it results in a complete nullification of the use. And that is exactly what Waltham's law is doing. That if you, have any of those, small bungalows up by Lakeview, you would not be able to add an ADU. If we look at Waltham's law, it says that an ADU must comply with the dimensional requirements of the underlying zoning district. That's right, that's allowed, so far so good. But it says that ADUs are not subject to the reduced setbacks permitted by all of the types of accessory buildings. This might be like a garage or a shed. It says no detached ADU shall exceed 1 story in height. Well, you're not allowed to do that. When you specifically look where the state law talks about unreasonable regulations, it talks about any requirement concerning dimensional standards, about setbacks, height, lot coverage, that are more restrictive than is required for the principal dwelling, or a single-family residential dwelling, or an accessory structure, whichever results in the more permissive regulation. So what Waltham is trying to do is kind of pick and choose, saying, oh, if you're like that, you have to follow these rules. Oh, if you're like that, you have to follow these rules, where the state law is very clear that it is unreasonable if you don't allow whichever results in more permissive regulation. So this is, one example with having detached ADUs not being able to exceed 1 story in height. But Waltham's law is full of this. One more is they talk about how each ADU needs to provide a parking space unless it's in half a mile of a transit station. In Waltham's law, they say it's been half a mile of a commuter rail station. Whereas in the state's law, they say that a transit station can include a bus station. So Waltham is trying to remove those bus stations from allowing to, serve as transit. I take the bus today. I take the bus to work every day. It's just as much transit as the commuter rail. So there's lots of stuff. And finally, one of the big ones is that Waltham is saying is that the ADU must be connected to the public water and sewer system and shall be separately metered in the principal single-family detached dwelling. Whereas it's clear in the section on unreasonable regulations from the state law that a municipality may not require a separate utility connection, such as water, sewer, or electricity. So Waltham definitely taking some steps forward, but there are several instances of this law that are just explicitly what the state said you weren't allowed to do. Now there are some things that Waltham does that are okay. They say that it has to be used for residential purposes and that it can't be a short-term rental. That's okay. They talk about that you have to maintain a separate entrance. You have to have, building code for safety egress. That's fine. It says that you need a building permit. That's okay. A building permit isn't any sort of discretionary, like zoning board of appeals approval or special permit. A building permit is just fine. And then one thing that it says is that a single ADU is permitted by right. More than one ADU on a single lot shall require a special permit from the Board of Appeals. So you get your one by right, but Waltham does allow you to file an appeal to get a special permit to get more than one. And that is one nice thing of Waltham's law, that they do let you get more than one. If we look at sort of some table of uses, this is kind of very zoning wonky, but if we look at where existing previously ADUs were only allowed in RA 1 through 4. This is really single family neighborhoods by a special permit by the Board of Appeals with that S2. If we look in this middle column, middle row, these are where new ADUs will be allowed. And we see it's a big Y, permitted by right in all of these, both residential and as well as some business districts. And that mimics, we see with single families where they are permitted by right or by special permit. And this is exactly what the state law says, that this is where ADUs can be built. So this is what Waltham is doing, where they're allowed to be located is 100% following the law in this case. Just talking a bit more about having multiple ADUs. So this is something that the Waltham's law is saying that the Board of Appeals may grant special permit to allow more than one ADU. They are allowed to have more leeway in what they approve. So specifically, Waltham is calling out that it needs to meet all your previous ADU definitions. It also needs to be compatible with the principal dwelling in the design, so they can use whatever kind of design character of the neighborhood arguments they want. They do require a sprinkler system in any home that has more than 2 ADUs. And they have that same level of parking requirements. So if you're within a half mile of transit, you don't need any. If you're further away, you need one more. Generally, I'll say this is the bright spot of the law, just because they didn't need to do this. It'll be interesting to see how many actually go out from this, but generally, this is nice that they're giving us the option to do so. Another thing they talk about are accessory buildings. Now, this is a part where that Waltham gets the law wrong. So accessory buildings are, those things like garages or sheds. Maybe if you have like a wood shop or a home office, something in the backyard. And the bold text of what Waltham adds down here is that an ADU shall not be considered an accessory dwelling unit for the purpose of this section. It must comply with the dimensional and setback requirements applicable to the underlying zoning district. And then I had this quote up earlier, which is saying that whatever results in the more permissive regulation. So, accessory buildings shall be at least 10 feet from the principal building and 5 feet from the side lot line and the rear lot line. That is more permissive than what the underlying zoning would allow. And at the state law, that is what should be required for ADUs. And similarly, this is when we were talking about, so no accessory dwelling unit or detached accessory dwelling unit shall exceed 1 story in height. We already mentioned this, that would be unreasonable just because it is not the most permissive. So there's a few places where, Waltham's law is falling short of what is required. This is just sort of an example to kind of show what this could look like. So this lot conforms to RA4 zoning. So this is something like you'd see in Warrendale or the Highlands. This is I believe it's a 7,000 square foot lot. If you can see, each of these little grid lines is a 5 foot by 5 foot. And after you consider all the front, the rear, and the side setbacks, we have 1,800 square feet to build, and lot coverage would say that we could build up to 1,750 square feet of that. But you could see, you could fit 1,200 square feet in that easily. You can build up 2 floors for a home. A single family home can fit very easily in this. But you see that you could have a garage in the back. This is 500 square feet. And this would comply with being a detached accessory building. It's within 5 feet from lot lines. It's less than the total rear yard, less than 25% the rear yard size. So as a result, this would be legal as a garage. And based on the laws that are on the state's books and what Waltham needs to comply to, this could also become an ADU. If we wanted to look at something that was attached instead of detached, here would be just sort of a different example. We have the same 1,200 square foot building, a 500 square foot ADU, and maybe that building could go up. So maybe it's 2 stories, but that ADU is just 1 story. But just kind of to give a sense of what this would look like. It would, be the same size as garage and sheds that folks already have. Or it could be, just part of a building, you really wouldn't know. So kind of wrapping up Waltham's law, we have, I call it the good and the goofs, and there's a lot of goofs. So generally we're getting rid of some of the previous restrictions, the stuff like you had to live there for 5 years, or you have to add, 2 parking spaces. So that's good. It also allows for multiple ADUs through that special permit process. So that's nice, but there's a lot of goofs in there, things that they missed and they got wrong. This, only allowing ADUs in single family homes, unreasonably restricting detached ADUs, requiring ADUs to have separate utilities, preventing those small homes, that 600 square foot, wherever they got that number from, preventing them from having ADUs, and then also, mandating parking near those bus stations. There's lots of ways they got this wrong. So at this time, I'd like to bring up Richard, who has been on a multi-year quest about getting an ADU built for his home, just to hear a bit more about kind of the personal taste. So I'd love to do it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to be here because many of you are housing activists that have been involved in housing, and I've watched with interest what you've done, but I haven't really got involved because I've been fighting for an ADU for 12 years. I bought a house in 2014 here in Waltham, and Edgewater Drive in Angleside, down from Brandeis. And when we bought the house, we saw a finished basement that had been lived in. And when we talked to the neighbors, what's it like living here, that sort of thing, they told me that people had lived in that basement for more than 20 years. That was what it was. So we were looking to retire here. I was working half-time and knew I'd retire within 5 or 6 years. So we bought the house. We invested quite a lot of money in upgrading the house, new floors, sliding doors, and we fixed up the basement. We took out the laundry sink that was there, and we put in a regular sink. We put in a stove or dishwasher, microwave, and got some basic furniture. Come July, there's Brandeis has a graduate students accommodation list. We signed up for that. We got 2 wonderful tenants, a Guatemalan doing the International Business School Masters, and his wife already had a master's and was working remotely. And for 2 years, we had them there. It was absolutely wonderful. They helped clear the snow. They helped carry in groceries for my wife because I used to travel a lot. And everything was wonderful. Then they left. He graduated. They went back and they left and found us new tenants, a Mexican couple.
Word of mouth, because they had such a big deal.
Yes, no, exactly.
Because they lived in a home.
Yes, very much so. But they had the separate entrance, they had their own bathroom stuff. You know, it was fine for them. And we also have a big back garden. And they told us and said, can we have a party for our friends? And they would sit outside, we have a barbecue, and they did it, and they were very happy with it. The next tenants did the same thing. But we made the mistake of putting a mailbox for them. And the neighbor next door, who I think has some prejudice, along with others not to be named, against Mexicans, reported us to the city. And the inspector came by and said, you should have a special permit. Be straightforward to get it, just go ahead and apply. Anyway, so we did. We got a petition from all the neighbors. The Angleside is a peninsula. We got 24 out of the 28 residents in the neighborhood, and we put together all of the conditions that they had. We hadn't lived there for 5 years, so we asked for a waiver. And that was, and we put it in, we did all the paperwork, we followed it. We spoke to a lawyer, we went to a ZBA meeting, and the lawyer who was presenting there said, well, what are you here for? I think he was looking for our business. And I said, well, this is what we're doing. And he said, it should be straightforward, just do the paperwork. So we did it. But at that time, the ZBA was under a rule of a supermajority. So it has 5 members, and you have to get 4 of the 5 to vote for your application. So we came. So we put in the application, and we were scheduled. And then we saw somebody we never know stop next door, go and talk, look at our house, and then came back. And the next day, when we came for the meeting, who was the chairman of the meeting? A woman who had visited. And she had only spoken to the one neighbor who was objecting. Yeah. So we made our case, going through all the details. People have lived there for 20 years. We've fulfilled the requirements except for the 5 years. And that's an unreasonable thing. It should be. And two of the 5 were clearly in our support. One was wavering, the chair, and one other, old McCarthy, not related to the mayor, but with similar attitudes, was against us from the day start. And we went through it, and they said, well, if they've been living there for 20 years, you have to prove that. So we said, fine, we can do that. And we went off. We got affidavits, and we submitted. Then they said, oh, we'll have to postpone the meeting. So another meeting. And then they wanted more information. So that's the third meeting. The other was postponed. So by that time we thought, oh, we're in trouble. So we went and got a lawyer, spent a fortune, I think, thousands of dollars on a lawyer. But before we did that, I did some research. I said, well, have there been any ADU special permits issued? The law department, the clerical person said, oh, I'll look up the things. And she discovered 4 applications in 20 years. And one of the people who'd rejected the application 20 years ago was still on the ZBA, the man who, with the McCarthy name. Anyway, so we were in trouble, we got the lawyer, and we went through it. And we went, the one successful case, we found out who the lawyer was, and I went to see her, and I said, look, you succeeded, can you help us? She said, absolutely not. I had such a terrible time with the ZBA. I'll never take another case there, and they're so difficult to deal with, etc., etc. Now, it wasn't just, it was the planning department we had a good relationship with. They came, they said, yes, it's very nice, you've done everything is to code as far as it goes, but you just need that permit. And I said, but what about other people having the ADUs? And they said, we know of at least 150 ADUs in people's basements that have never been permitted, and we don't do anything about it unless there's a complaint. In our little peninsula of 28 houses, I know of at least 3, and I suspect there's more than that. So it's a common thing. So anyway, 4th meeting, well, here's what you have to do. So we got the lawyer, he did all his business, made his case for us, and came to a vote. 3 for us, 2 against, we were rejected. So we had to evict our Mexican couple, and we had to get the stove disconnected from the electrics. And so we were stuck.
Why did you have to evict them? You should have just taken the stove out.
Well, the problem is that they can send the fire folks to do a house fire inspection on it. And if they find it and you're out of permit, you can be fined $300 a day. So that was the problem. So we were stuck, we got rid of them, and then I retired, I turned it into a home office, and we started a small gardening business to try and make up the money, because that rental was our long-term security. We had planned everything around having that regular, just the supplementary stuff, and having somebody there to help as it gets more difficult. But I did a research on it, and I looked at the regulations in other states where they have got it. And Oregon was the one that was one of the first. And they really demonstrated that it can have a dramatic effect on housing. It can reduce housing price, the rental prices, and raise house values at the same time. Our neighbor who protested, he said, oh, you're going to reduce the value of the house in this area. And all the empirical evidence is against that, and it clearly shows it is. So once, I tried with our councillor, and he put in a request to study neighbouring areas. 19 neighbouring western suburbs have them. Newton has, they have 2 sets of regulations, one for an attached ADU and one for detached, and they have made attached ADUs by right, and they had something like 400 ADUs permitted with that, doing that as far as it goes. So we're way behind. Now, the regulations as they were really obstructive. They were intended to prevent ADUs. A lot has been mentioned of what it is, the 5-year residence requirement, the relative requirement, the not being allowed to change. 2, they had a requirement at the time of 2 full exits, not 1 exit and a supplementary exit. So now the law is in place, it was passed. Now, the housing office of the state has done a lot of work to try and make cities and people aware of what is required. And they did a very excellent webinar, 1.5-hour webinar, where they went through what the requirements were. And it was so obvious. I wrote into the state saying, here's what Waltham is doing, and these are what you need to address. So then December the 23rd, draft regulations come out before the state had issued the full regulations that they were going to do. Those regulations, they then had public input meeting. Something like 65 people spoke. Tom Benavides did, I did, and we went through it. And it was very clear the vast majority of people in the public thing were saying, yes, we need ADUs, they're beneficial, and they add housing without capital costs. The city doesn't have to pay for more roads, more water, sewerage, electricity, anything like that. The existing infrastructure will accommodate ADUs. So the new regulations have come out, and it's absolutely clear to me that they are intending to continue to keep Waltham as a non-ADU area.
Why?
Oh, I do. The mayor is dead against it. The McMenamin is dead against it. There's a whole lot of councillors who absolutely object. And for a nice suburb like where we are in Angleside near the river, oh, it's not the way we do things in Waltham. Oh, it's not in my backyard. And anyway, so this meeting on Monday week, it's really important that we hammer it. You've done a wonderful job with your presentation, identifying where the law is in breach. But we really have to go at the issue, some of the specific issues, the issue of the height. I have a 640 square foot garage that's crying out for a second floor ADU. It would be, the infrastructure's there, it would be so easy to do that. So the 15-foot limit is explicitly prohibited in the law. The 600 square foot is desperately a malicious intent, because the law says modular ADUs are permitted. The vast majority of modular ADUs are 450 to 550 square feet. That's what has been successful in the Western states. So we really need to get in there and just identify all of these things. Now, I do feel, and I've written to you about it, how benign I think some of your comments are. Goofs? They're not goofs, they're malicious intent. And the one thing, the second ADU permit that goes through, the design and exterior appearance of the ADU is compatible with the principal dwelling in the surrounding neighborhood. That is a point, language that allows a prejudiced ZBA to prevent anything. They can say whatever they like. That is bad law. It's in the eye of the observer. It's not part of it. So there's lots of individual pieces that are put in place, but by putting all those pieces in place, they are continuing to try to prevent the having it. And I really hope people will go and try to make it. The other point
When is this?
Monday week,
This 24th.
the 24th, Monday.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay. Now, the other point to make is in the same way as Andrea Campbell has sued Milton for being in breach of the communities, MBTA Communities Act, she would be fully justified in taking action against Waltham if they pass these regulations. We would be liable to lose all of the health, exactly. We would be liable to lose all of the grants that we get. Now, my experience with trying to deal with the councillors, they just go ahead and do whatever they like without caring, without paying attention, and saying, if you don't like it, sue us. Our lawyer, when we were going through our business battle, he said, if you go to the state court, you are bound to win in this prejudiced environment. The fact that the chair of the committee came and spoke to the person who'd reported you without speaking to any of the other neighbors or listening to them. At the meetings, we had 10, 12, 15 of our neighbors getting up and supporting us to have this ADU. And they totally neglected it. So really, this is a fight, and I hope we succeed, but you know, it's a real battle. It's a small thing, and yet ADUs can move quickly.
It's very important because it's such a shortage of housing.
Yes,
Oh my
and
God.
especially for young couples.
And what do they think they are? Like Wellesley? It's like, come on, this is something. They just ripped up Trapella Road and put in whatever is going in there. It's like,
Yeah.
And I'm sure your house is gorgeous, you know?
The house is okay. The garden, we really have a wonderful garden. So anybody who comes by and wants to see our garden or wants some plants, they're very welcome. We share our plants with everybody as far as it goes. The Waltham Garden Club came and did a study visit last year. It was great. And please, if you are into gardening, please join the Waltham Garden Club. Yes, definitely. Okay, that's fine, that's me. But Monday next week is the key time.
get that up here. So what do we do now? So this is kind of the opportunity for public input. So there's opportunity for public input, not this upcoming Monday, but the Monday after. It'll be February 24th at 7:30. So this will be at City Hall, so there in the City Council chamber. And just like any law or proposed ordinance, there is a public input session to speak for or against it. So since this ordinance misses the mark, we recommend folks speak against it. Sometimes they'll, thank you. Sometimes like there'll be some things that we like and some things that we don't like. So people say, oh, I'm in favor of this except, or I'm opposed to this except, but this really is wrong. So, we recommend that folks speak against it. The city is trying to require these regulations that are explicitly called out as unreasonable, with requiring utilities to be split, with, not allowing ADUs, or only allowing ADUs for single family homes. The list goes on. The last time that WIN organized around public meetings, this was for the MBTA Communities Act. We had dozens of people show up in support. So one way to make sure that, you're just not another voice in the crowd, is to bring your own story about ADUs. Either a friend or family member who had one, or an opportunity you would have liked to have with one. So I'm sure lots of us here are going to belabor all those points about what the city is doing that is illegal, but please bring your own stories. At least two somewhat personal ones on my side. I remember I had a friend growing up, and his parents in their attic on their third floor, they had what was basically an ADU. And as I was friends with them, some years they would rent it out and make some money. Some years they use that as a home office, so if they had different kind of freelance work, if it made sense for them to work from home, it gave them the flexibility to do whatever made sense for them, either maybe some rental income or saving on office costs. Also, I know growing up, I had a great aunt, great uncle who grew up in town, had lived there their whole lives, raised their kids there. But then in, that home that they raised their children in, as their children moved in there and, had children of their own, instead of being, grandma and grandpa who now have to go live someplace else, they were able to build an ADU on that same house, stay close to the families, stay close to their grandchildren, stay close to the neighborhood that they loved and they grew up in. And, thinking back now, it was just, it's never like, oh, why does this home have two homes? That seems strange. I think, as you're told, you're like, oh, this is great. It's like all my family is in the same spot. So I just think about my family and my friends that were afforded that opportunity and that flexibility because of ADUs. So this, please, put it on your calendar if you haven't already for Monday, February 24th at 7:30 at City Hall. And I think that is it. I think that's it for me. So if there are any questions, comments, any things about ADUs?
What the city, like the comparative days where the city's putting these unrealistic restrictions on the state law.
I don't know if we have a printout. Do you know if there's been a graphic or anything?
But we could always ask the council to make one.
Yeah.
That would be actually great. Give us like a couple.
Yeah, the other thing is if you put it back up, I'll just photograph it with my phone.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
The presentation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let me find.
Can I also just say, the regulations, it's not very long. The city one and the state ones, it's only 2 or 3 pages.
And where did you get that from?
This is from the state website. The city one is damn hard to find.
Yes.
When I said to the lawyer, the city solicitor, she sent it to me, and I said back saying thanks very much. When is the meeting? And she said 20. It'll be announced. And she said it will be announced in the press and on the website. But it never was. And so I wrote to the city clerk, who did send me the revised clean copy. And he said, oh, we don't have to post it on the website. And so it's not easy to find. I'm very happy to give anybody a copy.
Yeah, and we have that. So if you've signed in, if your email is on that sheet, we can send like a follow-up.
I think you should send it out to everybody on your thing.
Yes, we'll be able to do that.
Recommending this so
Yeah.
that they know.
So we could have it in our hand.
Nick, I saw your hands up. Are you able to come off mute?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that explanation, and thank you, Richard. I had a question. I don't want to like be too pessimistic or like look too far into the future. Like I know that the meeting on the 24th is a good opportunity for us, but like I'm so used to like going and giving input and like feeling ignored by the city council. Like, is there kind of like a contingency plan if the city doesn't kind of do what we need them to do? Like, is there like legal recourse or like what? I mean, I know maybe I'm getting too ahead of myself, but like what would happen if like they pass a plan that is like actually not compatible with state law?
Yes, so I would hope we don't get there. I hope we're able to point this out to them. But municipalities went through that whole exercise with the MBTA Communities Act, having to pass new zoning regulation based on state requirements. So I think it is something that if cities and towns are not following through with this new law from the state for ADUs, there will be, the Attorney General will have some action. There will be other cities and towns that might be in the same boat as we are. I think while we kind of were kicking and screaming, dragging our feet, sort of as a city government to pass legislation around the MBTA Communities Act, we eventually did do something that, you know, was legal and followed the law. So I hope we will do the same for this ADU legislation. I think kind of looking for next steps, if that doesn't happen, I think it will depend on the sort of actions from the Attorney General or what other housing advocacy, ADU advocacy groups in the state are doing. But hopefully just calling out that what they're doing is illegal is a good first step. So,
Thanks.
no, yeah, there was someone else who had a chat. Other folks are asking for the slides. Yep, that's fine. Yes.
I mean, just a thought, I don't really know how quickly anything ever moves at the state level, and I'm assuming it's not. But if we have very good reason to believe that if these restrictions were passed as they were, there would be state level action, would it be reasonable or plausible to ask the Attorney General's office for an opinion on them before we even go to the info session and be able to say, hey, the state has already said this doesn't work?
We could. I don't know what the turnaround time for that is because we're looking just over a week. Generally, I might have some of my dates wrong, but the ADU language from the state was finalized and put into effect, I want to say like February 2nd, like the beginning of this month. And I believe cities and towns had like 100 days to have zoning that complied. And that was the timeline. So if we look at 100 days from the beginning of this month, you know, it would be something around June, when it would be clear any cities and towns that were not sort of in compliance with that.
Yeah.
As far as kind of that week turnaround, that might be tricky, but
Understood.
we could talk to some of our state partners with that.
The MBTA visa, the city did have to submit plans to the state to make sure they apply before the state would like sign off on them. I don't know if I don't believe there's the same program here. However, it is the response from the state has been for bureaucracy reasonably quick in terms of letting people know, hey, this isn't allowed and here's what happened to your city in terms of funding opportunities and such if you don't apply.
Right,
Yeah.
I mean, again, a week is a short turnaround,
Yeah.
but I was just thinking, you know, if we had an email from the Attorney General's office saying, we believe this is, like, we will say this is not in compliance when we went to the meeting.
It would be slightly getting ahead of ourselves. I think the state attorney general would be like, well, if they're voting on changing it, wait, see what they do. If they vote on something that is still not in compliance, I do expect the attorney general office will be paying attention, but sending an email there might not be bad. Hey, we know that this is not in compliance.
I was
Yeah.
totally gonna do that. I use Attorney General's website before, and this little checkbox at the bottom says I own 60%. And I think they give that priority.
Sure.
So I was just gonna send, Andrew Campbell, in case you're not busy fighting Trump this week, I'm sending you this about Waltham.
So you have the right idea, but because this is the beginning of the process of them becoming compliant with state law, there is a bit of politics in terms of when you pull out heavy hitters.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah.
The previous version that was of the state regulations included a required review. At the public input meeting, there was strong opposition, both from city planners, but also real estate folks, against that automatic review because they said that causes all sorts of delays and difficulties. And the new regulations that came out had it as the municipalities must keep a record of their regulations and of all applications and are able to report on which applications have been, how many applications have been received on demand. So, for example, the previous regulations did allow for municipalities to have the dual connections for water and electricity, strong opposition at the public meeting, and they've taken it out and followed those requests. But, you know, I spoke strongly against this 15-foot stuff, and they haven't been more explicit. I gave them language that I thought they could use to prevent this opportunity to try and prevent the second story of the 15 feet. So they are very good. The state folks on the housing program. One other point to make is the city of Boston has issued a 180-page booklet for how to navigate the ADU rules to promote ADUs in the Boston area. So that's where the city is trying to promote and use them. So it can be done. Because it doesn't cost the city anything to have an ADU.
No, I don't understand what it is. There's a building down the street.
Get back around.
We know there's a city law department that know that these laws are non-compliant. Like, is it malice or is it ignorance? Or both?
Yeah, I feel like it might be a little bit of both, you know, based on what they wrote to get this far, they had to be looking at the laws. So I know lots, as you mentioned, Richard, lots of the most up-to-date regulation was a result of some public feedback. So there is a possibility that maybe they haven't seen the most up-to-date things. However, you know, they are the city's attorneys. They should be looking at the most up-to-date things. So
the regulations came out.
yes,
That was before the state published the regulations. The laws were there, clear.
Yep.
But the regulations hadn't been released. So, you know, I expected them to revise it to take account, but they never attended the public meeting, and they clearly have not paid any attention to the regulations that were issued.
Yep.
It was very clear what the regulations were going to be, because they issued a red line document of what the decisions were going to be before February.
I've just had a thought, like, if one was this going to turn out like MBTA, they left a different plan printer and they distributed it out, and then they came to council and said, oh, there's this other one, we're not going to have agents, we're going to have there's that whole amount of, like, you have to have a session now to talk about this other one and prove it. And
yeah, I know to have a law passed by that 100 days deadline. Sometimes they have to put something forth as an ordinance, and even though it might be bad language, they have to let it through, and then maybe in the second reading they can adjust it. There are just ways that sometimes they can, you know, do funny business to meet those deadlines. But I think that, to your point, Saul, I think we're going to make it very clear at the public input that what they're doing is unreasonable by the state law, and you know, after that gets in the public record, then see what reaction is, because then it becomes very apparent if it is malicious or otherwise.
The huge building down the end of Exchange Street that wasn't there before. How is that gonna impact the city? Those aren't ADUs, those are, it's a whole huge apartment building that
Yep.
wasn't there before. It's gonna impact the water, the traffic, everything.
Yeah, we're not happy about it.
But it's there, they allowed it, but we can't have an ADU.
Well, so that is a 40B development, and that there's another reason why those are allowed, just due to Waltham's lack. So it's a state law, it's like chapter 40B of the state laws, so, but due to Waltham's lack of affordable housing, that,
It is affordable housing by a lottery, so if you don't get the
Yes.
lottery, you're SOL.
Yeah,
Because it's right over,
But
once
it's
you go over
about
so.
Waltham City Council doesn't have anywhere near as much say about it.
so they can't do anything about it.
exactly, just like this ADU law that was passed.
But
It's the same.
These affordable housing places, the units are not really affordable, and there's few and far between, it's not that many.
So, we can pull up the numbers from previous presentation. I think it was the one that was done with Watch CDC, County Government Center. The problem that we have with not seeing an immediate decrease in rents in terms of building more housing is how far behind we are. At some point in the 70s, a lot of areas around Boston downsized their zoning. So we had more permissive zoning and then decreased the allowed amount to be building. And so we're now 55 years past that. And we have had increased demand the entire time. And so one building here, one building there never actually changes the fact you have to have across the entire area a large increase in building. I want to say upwards of 100,000 units over the next decade. We'll see changes to bring us down to a reasonable market value. So that's how far behind we are on half a century of building. And so, where was that going? I was going somewhere with that.
It will, I think it's similar to what we have with this ADU law, it's that the only way that Waltham is making any progress with the affordable housing or just common sense housing policies is having it come from the state.
Yes.
And that it's not something that we have a lot of initiative to do ourselves.
And as you don't build more housing, the median income required to stay in the area goes up, which means the median income that is used in calculating what is and is not affordable goes up. And that's why state level initiatives like MBTA Communities Act are so important.
We don't have a bus station, right? Like the actual one in Watertown Center, that's a bus station.
Well, so if I go back, if this lets me go back.
Give you the definition of the act.
Yes, so this is what I have in the act, that the state law defines a bus station as a location serving as a point of embarkation for any bus operated by a transit. So that's because they just didn't follow.
But also, there are some towns which don't have bus stops where somebody can go to the road and put their hand up and the bus will stop for them. So it's an on-demand bus stop, and then in the discussion, the argument was that includes anywhere a bus goes where it's possible to stop it.
So that would like basically move parking requirements.
Yeah, a fair portion of it.
Yeah, so I thought it was strictly a bus station where particularly buses.
They are.
No, they're very, very permissive with the state law. We have just a few minutes left in the room here. I didn't see any other comments or anything online. Anything else here in person?
I also noticed the sprinklers requirement seems a bit restrictive, like duplexes, like if you had I live in a duplex and I don't have sprinklers.
Yeah, so
Another-
somewhere, so what it says is that you have to have sprinklers in any home with more than 2 ADUs. So this is if you have a primary residence that has more than 2. So that would be 3 at least.
Triplex.
So, and I believe the way. So I think if you had like a primary home that had 2 ADUs in it and like a detached ADU. You have your 3, but they're not in the same home. I think this is really just, I think this is state building code for sprinklers,
Okay.
which I think kicks in at like 4 or 5. I think what this is saying is that, you know, you have to follow similar sprinkler guidelines, you know, with number of units in a building, whether it's ADUs or if it's.
I think this is another one of these stop at all costs. What they're saying, sprinkler fire systems shall be required in any single family detached containing more than 2 ADUs.
Yeah.
Let's say there's a basement one in the backyard, what does that mean that they have to have sprinklers?
Well-
I really think we should be getting rid of that, it's our house.
Yeah, I think if we look at all of the other language that comes from the state, they're basically saying that ADUs should follow the same requirements for anything that is built there.
For a
And
single family dwelling.
yes, or any building in the underlying zoning district. And there are requirements for building codes, depending on how many units you have in an apartment building, eventually you do need a sprinkler system. But I think to call it out explicitly like this doesn't make sense. Either just follow normal building codes, or, kind of acknowledge that you're just making this more restrictive than it needs to be.
Sorry, can I just quote one other piece of that?
Of course.
It says, an ADU that is non-conforming to zoning shall still qualify as a protected use ADU if it otherwise meets this definition. So that is where the protected use ADU is by right.
Yes,
So
so that's kind of the big thing of making this by right in any neighborhood that would have single family homes.
It sounds like we're wrapping up. I would just like to end with the final note of, as we were working on the MBTA Communities Act, yes, we had the state pushing to make them compliant, but we do here too. And a lot of the changes that they selected in order to make the city compliant with the state's rules in that instance came from the feedback that we gave them at these input sessions. They reduced parking minimums, which is a huge driver of both costs and of sprawl. Because we mentioned multiple times that they were asking for more than people currently use. So, and I'm forgetting some of the specifics, but I remember a lot of your changes being in line with the feedback we gave. It can feel sometimes very frustrating and like nothing is happening, nothing is getting better, but we are seeing begrudging changes in response to the feedback that has been given in these sessions. It does drive how they choose to follow state regulations. And with this being something that they don't get a choice about, there is every possibility that we will see impact from showing up and pointing this out to them. Yeah.
can you tell us how long do people have to make comments about these meetings?
So I think by default, you're given kind of as much time as you want. If there's a meeting that has many people, sometimes they might say ahead of time, hey, we're gonna limit you to 3 minutes. A lot of times I've seen that happen for like when they like do something like with Moody Street. Are you gonna close Moody Street or not? That kind of gets everybody in town to show up. I think the types like these aren't as attended as those, so I feel like you would have as much time as you want. Sometimes, if you do go on 10, 12 minutes, it might say like, please wrap it up, there's other people. But generally, I think you'll be given as much time as would be required.
My experience is the speaker will tell you to wrap it up and start repeating yourself.
Yes.
I think we had 6 minutes the last time.
Oh, if it was, maybe, I didn't hear that, but yeah, generally, it's a fair bit of time.
And if you can't make it in person, about clerk desire.
Yes, you can absolutely email with.
And do we know if that gets in?
No. Council. You can also email me.
If you have,
Start following them.
if you have,
Absolutely, yeah, nothing's happening.
one of the benefits of calling and emailing is if you have an at-large counselor or a ward counselor that is sympathetic to the cause, they will bring that up in meetings, both to the ZBA meetings and in the general council meetings. I have constituents who have told me, they love being able to use that phrase, so that is one of the benefits. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you as well on Monday, the 24th at City Hall. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, everybody online.
We got until 5, I don't. I think it'd be tight, but I know there is.
The first one to speak.
Yeah, let me
I lived in an ADU, but I don't think I'm ever gonna speak in public again. I was so nervous.